All right. What's good, ladies and gents? So, I'm at work again. So, sorry I couldn't get this last lecture out in time. I've just been ripping and running trying to find a new car. So, that's been a hassle. So, just literally every day I've just been test driving cars left and right. So, otherwise, yeah, so hopefully the essay is going pretty good. I know it is kind of open ended, and it sometimes it is difficult to write an open ended essay. But I just want to give everyone the creative liberty of, just having fun, and just writing about what they wanted to write about. Kind of give you guys you know, the the stand to kind of teach a certain subject matter that you guys wanted to teach about. But essentially, I'm just gonna get started, and so not take up too much of your time because I know it is the weekend. Well, it's approaching the weekend, and it's the summer. People are wanting to have fun. But yeah, but it's just been rough. Well, not rough, but it's just been a very busy, week, and so I'll be working at 24. Well, I'm working at 24. Now I'm working another 24 tomorrow, down in Sharonville. So I'll just be going back and forth. But essentially, I'm just gonna start off basically where we left off, really. And so, where we left off was, well, on the European side, fall of Berlin. And so now Berlin is pretty much split in half between Russia and then, well, the Soviet Union at the time, and then also Britain, France, and America, the U.S. And so now it's going to be split right in half between West Berlin, East Berlin, or West Germany, East Germany. Um, on the Japanese side, and so Japan's under martial law, so um, they're kind of the U.S. military is kind of overseeing, making sure things are going well there, and that people are not uprising again and stuff like that. Um, but then by this time, also the atomic bomb becomes a thing. So because of the two atomic bombs that happened on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, that's when you get a lot of um, these experiments, like these people who come in with all this radiation, burns, all these symptoms, and that's when you get these scientists, and not scientists but doctors, who want to study the effects of the atomic bomb, and that's when it kind of gradually rises to the government, to where now the government wants to now test, how big can we make this bomb? How lethal can we make this bomb? What are the effects above and below ground? What are the effects on ground and at sea? Stuff like that. So then, because of the Trinity test, the Manhattan Project, Trinity test was the first atomic bomb experiment, and the heat was felt up to 200 miles. That's crazy, And so that's kind of what like kick-started the whole experimenting with atomic bomb usage. And then we got North Korea and South Korea. They're split because North Korea was under the control of the Soviet Union, but then now the Soviet Union now has sympathizers within North Korea. North Korea was a communist state or city or state, whereas the South Korea, they were more so republic. And so then you get to Vietnam. Vietnam was under French rule, and so then you got French colonial rule, and then this guy by the name what was it? Ho Chi Minh. Yeah, he was. So he started rising up as this rebellious leader to kind of take down and bring independence to Vietnam. And so that's what escalated into because Japan and French were involved in and France were involved in Vietnam. So then that's what escalated into the French Indo War, and well, the first one, and then the Viet Minh, that's what they were going to be called. They ended up making Hanoi the kind of like the city center, or like the capital of their operations. So then, when we go back to the U.S., we have these tests in 1946. That's when it kind of kickstarts everything. And then you got all these tests. And so you got Operation Sandstone on these atolls. So Inatawa Atoll, that was out in the Pacific, and so then they start testing there, and then they start testing, Operation Crossroads, which was the second one. So Operation Crossroads is on Bikini Atoll, and so there's a bunch of surplus of like captured or enemy ships or like surplus ships that they don't need anymore from World War II. So they just kind of sat them in the middle of the ocean. They planted this atomic bomb, and then they let it go off. And so then this one, they tested a series of Mk3 Fat Man bombs. And so basically the same configuration that dropped on, oh man, we're going Fat Man, on Nagasaki. And so when this detonated, it shot up like columns of water, like 1,000 feet high, or 10,000 feet high. And so there's definitely videos on it too, if you want to see it. Just type in like Operation Crossroads atomic bomb test, and you'll see how massive it is. It's probably one of the most popular recorded videos from that time. And then you got 6-foot waves up to around roughly like 3 or 4 miles away, but right at the site, there was waves that were just as high as 100 feet. Crazy. So then after that, you got 1948 with Operation Sandstone, like I said. So that was on Inawadic Atoll. Then you also got Operation Ranger, Operation Greenhouse, Operation Ivy, stuff like that. Operation Ranger, there was also Buster Jangle, and then Tumbler. So yeah, Tumbler. And then those were out in Nevada, actually. So those were both land and sea tests that they did. And that was between like 1951 and then 53. And then, so then when we jump over to Germany, so Germany has its own issues. So now it's plagued by destruction. They have to create a new government, stuff like that, where they're under the control of 2 different governments. And so because they're under control of 2 different governments, they're under the control of 2 different lifestyles. And so they got the Soviet Union side, where they're very harsh because now this is payback for what they brought on their people. Then you also got the Eastern side, which is a little bit more, a little bit more lenient on things. So especially because they want to rebuild Germany. They want to kind of let things go from the war. Not necessarily, but they want to just make things livable. So the U.S. so in 47 actually, Truman, 2 things. The Air Force finally became its own separate entity when the decree was signed on top of the Independence, which was Truman's plane. In 47, I want to say. Water. And so then, after that, you got the Truman Doctrine. So the Truman Doctrine was the idea that the U.S. was going to provide political, military, and economic assistance to any country that was either under threat from authoritarian regimes, or they just needed help. And so both like domestic and abroad. And so then at this time as well, Japan was still under that martial law as well. So by 48, that's when, because of the issues that Berlin was having with the Soviet Union, because Berlin was so far into the Soviet Union territory, that's when you get the Berlin airlift. And so that was in 1948. Well, started in 1948, June 1948. And the airlift was just a bunch of C-47s that would take off from East Germany, and then they'll fly into Berlin, drop their packages, drop supplies, food, medicine, all types of stuff, and then they would just try to turn around and fly back. And then, of course, some people crashed, some people were killed as well, and so definitely have to take note of how risky the operation was. And so then that continued on for another year or so, and then by 49, spring of 1949, um, NATO becomes a thing. And so NATO is about 11 countries, so it's the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and so now you got Soviet Union trying to create this block where they don't want the spread of U.S. Power. So then with the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, you get all these countries that are now in support of help from the U.S. The Soviet Union didn't really like that. And so that's when you got the Warsaw Pact as well. So the Warsaw Pact was kind of like this joint agreement that they wanted to keep U.S. expansion at bay, essentially. And so you got like Bulgaria, Romania, Czechoslovakia, of course, Soviet Union, Poland, I believe, is another one as well. So then by the 50s, it's just a rapid change in political, military, and economic means. And so then I'm gonna take a step back though. When you get to the home front, that's a whole different ball game. So then I'm just gonna keep that there for now, because the home front, that's another big thing. So then I'm gonna kind of fast forward, a little bit, and when we get to 1950, July 1950, you got North Korea, who's under, of course, Soviet Union support. North Korea believes that South Korea needs to be unified. They need to be under communism. So then North Korea, the 38th parallel, was created to kind of keep that boundary between the Republic of South Korea and the communist regime of North Korea. And so then North Korea, they decide to take over militarily, while the South Koreans wanted to take over diplomatically. So North Korea, they invade the South, and then the South asks for aid. So the U.S. comes. So now, mind you, Soviet Union wants to support the North Koreans. So then Soviet Union sends them supplies. Well, now the Soviet Union also finds out that the U.S. is now going to supply the Republic of South Korea. So then all this is going under the command of the same guy, the hero. Well, yeah, the same guy who kind of like one of the heroes of the Pacific, good old Douglas MacArthur. So he comes in, becomes the commander of the U.S. forces in North Korea, or the Korean War. So they're just supplying people. They're not really doing too much. But then there's another person, China. So China comes in and they push the United Nation forces back. So then China's now involved. So China, Soviet Union against the U.S. And so then that's when China, they push the U.S. back behind the 38th parallel. They push them back, and then that's what kind of starts this whole uprising. So 51 to 53, there's just back and forth, back and forth. So then it becomes a stalemate. No one's really making any headway. And so whenever the U.S. and South Korea get pushed behind the 38th parallel, they counterattack, they get pushed forward. In the air, there's a couple different things. So now this is the first jet combat, And so first you get the Me-262 from Germany in the late period of the war. You got the Me-163 Comet from Germany as well. You got the Meteor from Britain. You got all these different, the Starfighter now comes along too, and so, but then you got the F-86 from the U.S. And so the U.S. at this time, they're still trying to figure out jet combat, because they come from, the P-51, the P-40, P-47, P-38s, all these aircraft that they're fast for a prop-driven aircraft, but none of them have gotten anywhere remotely close to breaking the sound barrier. Now you got these planes going more than several hundred miles an hour You got planes going up to 600 miles per hour. And then you can't really lead a target the way you would do in a prop-driven plane. You also can't, dive dive and pull out of a dive late because you're going too fast. You need that time to pull out. So you got all these accidents that are happening, but also Soviet Union, they had the MiG-15. MiG-15, if you've ever seen a MiG-15 in real life, I have, at the Dayton Air Show 2 years ago, that thing is fast. And so, as well, they also train pilots to fly them. And so now, America in their F-86s, they're fast, they're agile, but they're not as agile as the MiG-15. You also have a lot of people who are shot down because they just don't know how to fight a modern jet war or jet dogfight. They're still fighting the same way they were in a prop-driven plane, which was turn-based fighting. So they will constantly try to fight each other in a circle, try to get behind the other. They would do different maneuvers like the Immelman, the split S, stuff like that, just try to get the advantage. So a lot of them actually what they would do was when they were when they were circling, some of them would actually kind of duck down. So then by the time they come back around, they're right on their tail again. So there's stuff like that, where it's hard, especially in a jet aircraft. So now, when it comes to a couple instances where the F-86 pilots notice that the MiG-15 pilots, they're not North Korean. Some of them are actually Russian. So you get the instances of Russian pilots shooting down American pilots, which that is a big issue. But they kind of keep it hush-hush, So then, after that, Truman, he makes the decision to publicly relieve MacArthur of command after MacArthur comes after him for just creating an armistice. So there's a armistice that Truman announces. He gave up basically on trying to unite the country. Essentially, he was just like, it's not going anywhere. So then, the armistice came after when Dwight D. Eisenhower actually became president. But essentially, MacArthur was mad. He was like, we got this in the bag. Why are you going to stop now? So then he made it public. He was like, Truman this, Truman that. He's like, he's the worst. I wish his breakfast was old. I don't know. But basically, he talked back to Truman as commander-in-chief of the U.S. military. Truman was like, all right, you're done. So there was an early retirement for MacArthur, essentially. Dwight D. Eisenhower then became president after that. So Dwight D. Eisenhower, his administration brought about the armistice. And so I believe, if I'm not mistaken as well, I'm going to have to look back at my notes, but I'm pretty sure back in grad school, I believe he was kind of regarded as a very Christian, religious guy, where he was against this violence, So don't quote me on that. That's what I heard. But of course, I was not born back then, in the 50s and 60s, so I don't know. But basically, by July of 27th of 1953, this armistice was created. And so now, that's when we kind of jump back to these nuclear bomb tests. So America continues back on the home front to create these bomb tests, and 1954 happens. So you guys, I kid you not, you have to look this up. So Castle Bravo, that was one of the most recognizable atomic bomb tests that anybody would probably know. And so on Bikini Atoll, and so It was a shrimp test bomb. Not too sure what that may be, but the shrimp test bomb. So it was the first surface H bomb, the hydrogen bomb that the U.S. created, made out of a. It was a solid fuel kind of compound essentially, and so they were under the understanding that there was a certain isotope within the chemical structure that was dormant. It wasn't going to react to anything, and so then they set it off. This bomb ended up creating 15 megatons versus the 6 that they thought was going to happen. So it is the largest thermonuclear burst ever conducted on U.S. soil or U.S. territory. This crater was 250 feet, and the cloud reached about 18 miles high, and then the crater diameter was about a mile, radius was about a mile across. And so, the cloud was 60 miles across as well. But it was the worst radiological disaster in the modern history, in human history possibly, next to Chernobyl. But the failure to conduct safety measures caused so much, honestly, so much terror or horrific stuff that has happened. So about all the islanders that were around that Bikini Atoll, which were moved off the island, all of them were they were exposed to the radioactive fallout. They were subjected to up to about 175 rad, which was a lot. Then you got Japanese Fisher, the fifth lucky dragon. So this is controversial, especially for Japan. So when everyone on that ship was subjected to radiation, one of them, I believe, ended up passing away. So that became a political issue between Japan and the U.S. They were all subjected to about 300 roten, yeah, I believe, ROTEN. Now, all of Bikini Atoll was evacuated completely. There were ships up to 30 miles away that were subjected to radiation as well, so all of the sailors had to go below deck and basically vacate the ship. They literally created a sun on Earth. If you see videos of it, it literally just lights up the whole screen of the video. And so I'm sure in person, a video just can't do it justice. But now when we go back to Vietnam, in the mid-1950s, Vietnam is officially liberated from France. Vietnam's not a colony of France anymore. And so now Ho Chi Minh, he's kind of like seen as this leader, what was it? So at Dien Bien Phu, that was where his victory came at. And so this ended the First Indochina War, and now the Democratic Republic of Vietnam, the DRV, was now backed by the Soviet Union by this point. So now the Soviet Union understood that, now that the Vietnam is now not under a republic leadership control, now it's time for us to take over. Issue is that South Vietnam, they didn't like that so much as the North Vietnamese. So then, because of that, you also got the Warsaw Pact and everything too. So now you got Vietnam, who was half under Soviet rule. You got half of Europe essentially under political or republic rule and under capitalist control, one under communist control. And so now you got the Iron Curtain. It's basically it's done. That's it. That's the split. And so under the Geneva Accords in 1956, Vietnam was finally made a republic. Well, they wanted to make Vietnam a republic by election. So it'll be diplomatic. A diplomatic vote. If the votes come to where Vietnam has to be a communist state, then cool. If it's republic, cool. That's it. Well, they didn't want it that way. So then it was stalled out due to some, rising tensions from the West and the Soviet Union and stuff like that. So then it was just this big controversy over who was going to take control of Vietnam, because Vietnam didn't want any more, any more invasions, But then they also, some of them wanted support from. Well, no, so they didn't want any invasion. That's what it is. So then, I'll look at my notes here. Yeah. So then, because of this growing tension where the U.S. wants to go in and help Vietnam with their issue and stuff like that, Vietnam starts seeing that maybe Soviet Union can help us because they're in support of our rise to independence. So then, that's when you get, where is it? Yeah. So then, in '64, after there's some kind of like these military advisors getting sent over to Vietnam to help with supporting the South Vietnamese regime with fighting back the North Vietnamese. So then we're trying to help them, trying to supply them, but then by '64, Gulf of Tonkin happens. And so that's when the USS Maddox, or Maddo, depends, that was attacked by North Vietnamese Navy. And so there's a group of torpedo boats that shot at the Maddox, USS Maddox. And this became basically a declaration of war, essentially, for the U.S. So then the U.S. now has a reason to get into Vietnam. So then that's when the Gulf of Tonkin resolution was passed, which gave the U.S. the authority to then commit to a military invasion of Vietnam. So that's basically what goes down. But then we got to revert back to the home front. So then, now, where is it at? I'm going to go back. Wrote this all down, but because I'm at work, I don't have everything together. Cool. Alright, so now we get to the home front. All the GIs are back from the war. It's a big celebration, and kind of things set in. Things actually go pretty well between 1945 and 1955, especially in terms of economics. So the stock market rises up to like 40%. People are buying more things, more inventions, better, faster cars, stuff like that. But that's what kind of like the issue is, that because there's so many new things that are going on and people are buying more and newer things, there could becomes a economic gap, because then you got the GI Bill, where the veterans can now have a chance to live a lavish lifestyle because of all this income that they're getting. But the GI Bill isn't as lucrative to the African Americans. The African Americans don't get enough. So then that's when you get this large disparity in economic classes. And then, you kind of get this idea of the American dream, where they all want their like white picket fences and cut grass, their dog, and then the wife with lemonade and all that. And everyone sits down as a happy family. It's called the nuclear family. That's what it is, but because it's like the nuclear age, and so that's what the American dream is. And so then you start getting these where like these industries and jobs kind of take hand, and people are starting to move into the metropolitan area. Metropolitan areas start to boom. Like New York City, stuff like that. So then they start creating these suburbs, and so basically these people start building houses outside of the city, so then they don't have to travel as far to go to work. So then these suburbs become especially more and more popular. William Levitt, I believe looking up, he's architecture who built basically what the standard was for most of the suburbs that you see at that time. They're called like the Levitt houses, and so they're very cost effective, but they're also fast, and but they're also fast to build and put up and very cheap. But it was enough to kind of get the families moved in. So then there's another issue though, women. So women by this time, because they were in the workforce so much during the war, now they don't have to be. But also because the GIs before they left, they had their children, they got married, stuff like that. So then by the end of the war, you start getting the baby boom. GIs come back, they have more children, and then of course women have to go on maternity leave. So then now they're home. Now they're not working as much. But then that's the issue though. So then when they get stuck at home, they start to get all these new things. They start to get the best refrigerators, the best toasters, the best ovens. They start doing all these household things, and then they become, you're what that standard was for a woman at that time. So then you get, kind of like this uprising. What was it? Feminism. Where women have to be held to that same. I believe women have to be have the same rights and held to the same standard as women or men. So then you kind of get these different books. These different books where I believe it's. Oh goodness, where is it? I'm gonna look up this book. Nope. Yeah, so you got like femininity starts at home, and then feminine mystique. That's another good one actually that I wrote down. And then that was by Betty Friedan. And so essentially women leave the workforce, and then they're forced to live that kind of like family lifestyle, and then the suburbs were literally just like suffocating them. They were stuck there while the men went out and worked their jobs and stuff like that. And so it was actually a huge contributor to the 1960s push to for the feminist movement. And so then after that, because of the baby boom, you got 4 million babies, 4 million nuggets that are pumped out every year. Every year. That's insane. So, because of this huge rise in population, this huge rise in economic prosperity, this huge rise in work and jobs and all these nice inventions and advancements in technology, you get basically the golden era of capitalism is what they called it. But it wasn't a golden era for everybody though. So then you got Linda Brown, who enrolled her children in elementary school, but the elementary school turned them down because of their color. So Linda Brown, she filed a lawsuit against the school on the grounds of they went against her 14th Amendment right, which was that she would not be discriminated. She would be held to the same rights as anyone else on the basis of race, gender, stuff like that. And so then that became the Brown versus Board of Education. And then that was also kind of like the first victory against like Jim Crow, because Brown versus Board of Education ruled by the Supreme Court that she was actually right. That because the school denied her, that is deemed for a school to be segregated, or a public school to be segregated, that is deemed unconstitutional. But by this point also you get all these, it's like the social norm. You get your white neighborhood, black neighborhood, black bathrooms, white bathrooms, black restaurant, white restaurant. It was the norm at the time. But because of this was kind of like the starting point for a bunch of different things, the South signed the Southern Manifesto, where basically they will prevent the fall of segregation. They will uphold that rule of segregation essentially. And so then the KKK started rising and started causing terror. You got Rosa Parks, who when she was on the bus, she rode in the front seat, and then of course she was brought out, and then because of that, Martin Luther King, who was at that time a younger preacher, and it was kind of like his rise to fame, was starting the 13-month boycott of buses. You got sit-ins, you got the Little Rock Nine, stuff like that. And then you got thousands of white families who started removing their children from these schools in desperation, because of the fact that now you got African Americans who can now, or black Americans who can now become part of the school system. So then, what else? But yeah, so this kind of like leads into kind of like that 1960s, late 1950s into the 1960s, kind of like fight against civil rights, really. But essentially, that's really it. But you also get kind of like this rise in music. So by that time, you got kind of like a rise of the rebellious era. With I believe it's with like the Socias and like the what was it? The Greasers, like with the Outsiders, Warriors, essentially. It's another movie, kind of like center. I believe Warriors might be around that time. Maybe a little bit later, but you got this rise of rebelliousness, and then you got the music genre started to take a change. So rock and punk rock started becoming meshed, and you got more grunge started becoming in that teen age. So you got a lot of changes, socially, economically, militarily, that happened throughout the 50s, and it is a lot, but that's what kind of like makes grounds for now the 60s, because the 60s, you also got the assassination of one president, you got one upcoming president, and then you also got a civil rights leader, possibly even multiple civil rights leader, and then you also got the Vietnam War and how it affects the home front as well, and how a home front actually affects a war as it progresses, and kind of like then you got this kind of like change in military ideology, especially with the U.S., which then leads into further military action afterwards, and what creates the modern foreign policy when we're going forward. So that's all I got for now. I'm sorry it's so little, but it's kind of like the basic gist of it. And so, because I'm at work, I didn't really have too many notes to put down, but that's essentially what you can get out of just kind of like that, 10-ish year period. Those are like the main things. Of course, there's a lot of other small things, but essentially, you got the civil rights movement kickstarting. You get the nuclear family and the American dream, which kind of kickstarts the feminism movement into the later era. And then you also got the kickstart of the Korean War. You got these changes in geopolitical territories. You also got the kickstart of the Vietnam War, and because of U.S. policing, how it progressively just gets worse and worse, especially for the U.S. And then you also get that teen angst, which then morphs into what we now know as hippies in the 60s, and then 60s into the early 70s. And then it just, everything changes. Everything now becomes more and more chaotic as the U.S. tries to figure out how can we fix all this, because there's so many things that are going wrong all at once. I'm going to get into that a little bit next time, but essentially just focus on this essay for this week. And so I'm sorry that I have to put the lecture out this late in the week on a Wednesday, but you know, we got it in. So yeah, I'm gonna post. I'm gonna try to get another lecture going on Sunday. Yeah, Sunday will be my next free day. Sadly, so actually Friday evening. No, Saturday, Sunday. It'll be Sunday. So Sunday, I'll get something out. But in the meantime, just focus on that essay of World War II, and definitely just have fun with it, really. And so, if there's anything that, even if I didn't talk about it in the lecture, if it's something that's outside of the lecture that you want to talk about, go for it. As long as it pertains to World War II and you find it a significant portion of that war or that time period, definitely talk about it. So just have fun with it. Definitely make sure your citations are good. Some of you are definitely making the effort to do that, and I thank you guys for that. And then also, if there's anything that you guys need help with, definitely reach out to me. And so I'm always available throughout the day. I may not reply to you instantly, but I will reply to you eventually within that 24-hour period, usually. And then if I'm doing something wrong, if I need to do something that will help you, let me know. We're all learning here, especially as my first time teaching. So we're all in this together. But hopefully the class has been fun so far. I know the lectures are definitely spotty here and there, but I am trying to get them out, at least pump one out a week. So that kind of keeps me on track to get to 1991 before your final paper. And so otherwise, just stay hungry, guys, stay in it, and just have fun with it, really. I'm trying to make the course fun for you guys, because it is a fun subject matter. And so I'm constantly learning new things, and even as I graduated with my master's, I'm still learning new historical facts. I'm still trying to retain more information about history. And so it's constant learning battle, but it's always about the journey. So definitely stay hungry about it, stay safe. It's all going to be good. It's going to be a good time. But take care, guys. Next time, I'll have another lecture out. Next time, we're going to talk about the Vietnam War, hippies, and then music culture, and just Woodstock. We're going to get to that, too. Otherwise, just take care, guys. Have fun. Type that paper. See you later.